Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Louis Blouin, vice-président de la Tribune de la presse parlementaire. Merci d'être là aujourd'hui. Vous avez devant vous le chef d'état-major de la Défense, le général Wayne Eyre. Vous avez la ministre de la Défense, Anita Anand, Madame Louise Arbour, et le sous-ministre de la Défense, Bill Matthews. So we will start by a speech by the Minister Anand and Ms. Arbour. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, bonjour. I am joining you today from the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. Today, we reaffirm our commitment to meaningful reconciliation and respectful partnership with Indigenous peoples. Aujourd'hui, nous accueillons l'ancienne juge de la Cour suprême, l'honorable Louise Arbour, pour la publication du rapport final de l'examen externe complet et indépendant sur l'harcèlement sexuel et l'inconduite sexuelle au sein du ministère de la Défense nationale et des Forces armées canadiennes. Madame Arbour, merci d'être ici avec nous aujourd'hui et je vous passe la parole. Passez la parole maintenant.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la ministre. Monsieur le chef d'état-major, Monsieur le sous-ministre, plusieurs des questions qu'on m'a demandé d'aborder dans ce rapport n'ont malheureusement rien de nouveau. L'ampleur de l'inconduite sexuelle au sein des Forces armées canadiennes, y compris au sein des grades supérieurs, était déjà bien documentée dans le rapport de mon ancienne collègue, la juge Deschamps, dans les sondages menés par Statistique Canada, dans les rapports du vérificateur général, et dans le règlement final des recours collectifs Hayter and Beatty, ainsi bien sûr que par les médias. Dans son rapport sur la justice militaire paru l'an dernier, mon ancien collègue le juge Fish a également abordé certaines des questions liées à la poursuite des cas d'inconduite sexuelle dans les forces armées. Selon mon mandat, je devais examiner si les efforts déployés pour concrétiser un changement de culture dans les forces armées avaient été efficaces ou s'ils étaient susceptibles de l'être. Et pour la première fois, on m'a demandé d'examiner de près le développement du leadership en lien avec la persistance des agressions, des abus, du harcèlement et de la discrimination d'ordre sexuel dans l'organisation. Cet aspect, qui n'avait pas encore fait l'objet d'un examen externe approfondi, s'est avéré une tâche laborieuse consistant à étudier des procédures et des pratiques très détaillées et complexes. De manière générale, j'ai constaté que le changement de culture au sein des Forces armées a très peu de chances de se produire si l'organisation continue d'insister sur une autonomie totale. Les forces ont en effet besoin d'oxygène en provenance de l'extérieur, moins sous la forme de surveillance supplémentaire que par un apport extérieur dans plusieurs des fonctions qui ne sont pas propres aux exigences opérationnelles d'une armée efficace. Je parle ici, par exemple, de l'éducation, de la justice et de certains aspects de la gestion des ressources humaines. La profession des armes n'est pas une profession comme les autres. Elle ne peut être exercée que de manière collective au sein d'une entité unique contrôlée par l'État. Pour la plupart de ses membres, il s'agit d'une carrière à vie. La main-d'œuvre y est très jeune, tout comme ses hauts dirigeants. Ces derniers sont entièrement issus de l'organisation elle-même. En effet, il est impossible pour les forces de recruter des leaders dans le secteur privé et bien sûr encore moins chez leurs concurrents. D'où l'importance du développement du leadership dans un changement de culture et l'importance d'une influence externe à travers les forces. L'intégration des femmes dans le monde militaire au Canada n'est pas le fait d'une initiative interne. À des étapes critiques, elle leur a été imposée par les tribunaux. Les forces culturelles qui façonnent l'évolution de la société canadienne sont lentes à se manifester dans une organisation enracinée dans l'homogénéité, l'uniformité, la tradition et l'autonomie. La culture hyper-masculine et hyper-sexualisée, dont la prévalence au sein des forces armées a été exposée, est le produit de cet environnement. Aucun progrès dans la gestion de la diversité ne peut se faire en vase clos. Cet aspect est au cœur de la plupart de mes recommandations. Permettez-moi maintenant d'en aborder les principales. As previewed in my interim report, I recommend that criminal sexual offenses should be within the exclusive jurisdiction of the civilian criminal courts. This was the case prior to 1998. Military justice rests on the need to, and I quote, enhance efficiency, discipline, and morale in the armed forces. No other rationale was advanced in 1998 to vest jurisdiction in the military system for sexual offenses, which until then had been within the exclusive purview of civilian courts, as murder, for instance, still is today. The handling of sexual offenses by military court in the past 20 years has done very little to improve efficiency, discipline, and morale. If anything, it has served to erode it. Therefore, I see no basis for the Canadian Armed Forces to retain any jurisdiction over sexual offenses, and that jurisdiction should be vested exclusively with civilian authorities. As long as concurrent jurisdiction remains, the evidence so far indicates that the CAF will continue to consider itself the primary jurisdiction and that civilian authorities will happily decline to exercise it. This is particularly surprising considering that, on average, the military justice system handles approximately 30 sexual offense cases per year, and that's combining summary trials and court-martial, while civilian courts process over 2,300 such cases every year. Worse still, the idea that the choice of forum should rest on victims imposes on them an unfair burden, as they could never be fully equipped to make an informed decision. I also recommend that the duty imposed on CAF members to report sexual misconduct should be abolished. In response to the long-standing problem of underreporting, the CAF leadership stressed the existence of the duty to report, which rests both on victims and bystanders alike. This serves only to impose additional hardship on victims while posing moral dilemmas on those wanting to respect their wishes. I note that last week the Minister announced an amendment to the Queen's Regulation and Orders purporting to relieve senior officers involved in the class actions restorative engagement process from that dilemma. I think it's really important that the same be done for the rest of the CAF members who are confronted with that issue on a daily basis. I also recommend that victims of sexual harassment and discrimination should be facilitated access to the Canadian Human Rights Commission and Tribunal, and that better resources be made available through the Sexual Misconduct Resource Centre. The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal is an external source of expertise which has already had a very important impact on the integration of women in the CAF. I simply recommend that the CAF should stop objecting when complainants seek redress in that forum. Turning now to leadership development, I recommend measures to speed up and improve recruitment and basic training. I am very concerned about the future of the two military colleges as undergraduate institutions. Almost half of the commissioned officers in the CAF receive their education in military colleges. Others attend civilian universities while undergoing military training. The officer naval cadets at RMC Kingston and CMR Saint-Jean are primarily white young men from Ontario and Quebec. At just below 25%, women are better represented there than in the total population of the regular forces and their reserves, where they currently stand at 16.3%. However, this is still far below the average presence of women in civilian universities. The continued prevalence of sexual misconduct at the military colleges is well documented, and I think it's harder to address these issues there than in a civilian environment. While I was not in a position to examine in detail the quality of the academic stream, the military leadership and physical training at these colleges is problematic and does not, in my view, justify the continuation of this model as an undergraduate university environment. I think their future should be fully considered with broad-based consultation. I have made detailed recommendations about the CAF system of performance evaluation and promotions, which I think places too much emphasis on performance and not enough on conduct and character. It's also not conducive to speeding up the accession of women to senior leadership position, and in that regard, I stress the importance of my recommendation to establish a system of progressive targets to increase the representation of women in the ranks of general officer flag officers. And finally, a word about external oversight. My recommendations are all interrelated. If what I have referred to in my report is implemented, then I don't see the need for an inspector general to oversee culture change in relation to sexual misconduct. The minister and the Department of National Defense have an important role to play, and the contribution of civilians should be enhanced throughout as a source of knowledgeable outside expertise. I add that I am concerned, of course, about the multiplication of bureaucracies with powers only to recommend, whatever their structure and composition. The CAF has already a massive amount of existing recommendations that it needs to address. In light of previous inertia in that regard, and of my experience in the implementation of my interim report, I recommend the immediate appointment of an external monitor to ensure the implementation of my recommendations, should, of course, the minister accept them. I look forward to the government's final position on all these issues before the end of the year. In conclusion, let me say this. The conduct of the members of the Canadian military has undergone intense public scrutiny in recent years. This was due in large part to the courage of the many who have come forward to denounce discrimination, harassment, and sexual misconduct. Their efforts will benefit not only the Canadian women who aspire to join the profession of arms, but also the many underrepresented groups who hope for a safe working environment in the development of their career in the CAF. Two things could derail the path to significant change. The first would be to assume that this is only attributable to a culture of misogyny and that change will come naturally with time and just more enlightened attitudes. The second would be for the CAF to think that it can fix its broken system alone. Meaningful change will rest on the political will and the determination of civilians who oversee the Canadian Armed Forces. Still, it will not happen without the support of CAF leaders and ultimately without the goodwill of all its members who are every day entrusted with the duty to protect our country and who do so on our behalf. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madame Arbour. During global conflicts, forest fires, floods, and throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, the members of the Canadian Armed Forces have risked life and limb to protect Canadians. The Canadian Armed Forces undertake dangerous work and make tremendous sacrifices to keep Canadians safe. We owe them an enormous debt of gratitude. L'obligation la plus fondamentale que nous avons envers nos militaires est de veiller à ce que leur lieu de travail soit un endroit où tout le monde se sent en sécurité, protégé et respecté par leurs propres collègues. En avril dernier, mon prédécesseur, le ministre Sajjan, a demandé à l'ancienne juge de la Cour suprême, Louise Arbour, de procéder à un examen externe, complet et indépendant des politiques et de la culture des forces armées canadiennes et du ministère de la Défense nationale. Our government asked Madame Arbour to undertake this critical task, given the prevalence of harassment and sexual misconduct in this organization, and in recognition of the fact that existing efforts to address systemic problems had fallen far short of their intended goals. Today, I confirm that I have received and I accept Madame Arbour's final report in its entirety. It is my pleasure to share this report publicly, and in particular, its suite of thoughtful recommendations that I welcome. This report will inform defense teams' ongoing and concerted efforts to improve and grow the culture of this institution. Aujourd'hui, je confirme que j'ai reçu et examiné en profondeur le rapport final de Madame Arbour. J'ai le plaisir de partager publiquement ce rapport et en particulier sa série de recommandations qui vont guider nos efforts pour améliorer et renforcer la culture de cette institution. The report is extensive, with 48 substantive recommendations addressing a wide array of issues, such as the definitions of sexual misconduct, the military justice system, military colleges, and the role of the Sexual Misconduct Response Center, to highlight just a few, so that we can rebuild trust. I spoke with the Prime Minister this morning. And at the outset, let me be clear that we wholeheartedly agree with the significant issues that Madame Arbour has identified, and we thank her sincerely for this profound review. I recognize that some may express skepticism about our ability to achieve and our commitment to pursue reform. Let me clearly state my belief that this is the moment to create change. And we expect the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence to establish meaningful reforms that stand the test of time. Before I address the report itself, I will review several ongoing initiatives to reform the culture of the Canadian Armed Forces, many of which closely align with Madame Arbour's recommendations. L'année dernière, nous avons lancé le groupe Chef Conduite Professionnelle et Culture sous la direction de la Lieutenant Générale Carignan. Ce groupe élabore actuellement une stratégie globale de changement de culture qui devrait être publiée en décembre. Et je remercie sincèrement la Lieutenant Générale Carignan pour son leadership. Over the past year as well, we have also expanded the reach, the independence, and the services offered by the Sexual Misconduct Response Center, thanks to the efforts of Dr. Denise Preston and so many others at the SMRC. Canadian Armed Forces members, national defense employees, and veterans alike can all receive the high standard of support when they reach out, including through the SMRC's confidential 24/7 helpline. The SMRC is also coordinating a restorative engagement program for members of the DND CAF Hayter-Beatty class action and defense team members affected by sexual misconduct. This program enables our institution to hear from thousands of class members who suffered from misconduct in the workplace so that their experiences can inform our culture change efforts. De plus, nous définissons nos attentes en matière de conduite pour tous nos militaires par le biais d'une nouvelle ethos des forces armées canadiennes, appel digne de confiance pour servir, qui sera publié prochainement. And we are strengthening and modernizing the military justice system. Next month, the Declaration of Victims' Rights will come into force, which will afford victims of service offenses the same rights as victims in the civilian criminal justice system. And then finally, on November 4th, 2021, I accepted an interim recommendation from Madame Arbour to refer the investigation and prosecution of criminal code sexual offenses from the military justice system to the civilian justice system. And since receiving that recommendation, we have worked closely with federal, provincial, and territorial partners to begin the referral of sexual assaults and criminal offenses of a sexual nature to civilian authorities. I have written to provincial and territorial ministers and updated Madame Arbour on our progress throughout. In January, the RCMP began to accept transfers of new files from the forces. En février, le ministère de la Sécurité publique du Québec a conseillé à son service de police d'accepter les nouveaux dossiers et les transferts en fonction de sa capacité et a souligné qu'un protocole détaillé était en cours d'élaboration. Several municipal and local police forces have also accepted transfers on an ad hoc basis. I thank my colleagues, Ministers Lametti and Mendicino, for their collaboration as we pursue this change, and recognize that there remains more work to be done. And in this regard, I will be writing to provincial and territorial partners this week about the path forward. To smooth the case transfer process, our officials will collaborate even more closely with provincial and territorial authorities, and we are making plans to establish a formal intergovernmental table to build durable transfer processes that will serve Canadian Armed Forces members well in the long term. Now, let me turn to the new actions that we will take in response to the 48 recommendations in Madame Arbour's report. First and foremost, Madame Arbour lays out what I refer to as procedural safeguards. These are two. First, she recommends that by the end of 2022, I inform Parliament of any recommendations that we do not intend to implement, and I commit to doing so. Second, in response to Madame Arbour's final recommendation, I will appoint an external monitor mandated to oversee the implementation of these recommendations. The external monitor will report directly to me and will publish regular public reports. Our response to all of these recommendations will be clear, open, and collaborative. I can announce as well that we are immediately beginning to work on or continuing efforts already underway to implement 17 or just over 1/3 of these recommendations. Je peux annoncer que nous commençons immédiatement à travailler ou à poursuivre les efforts déjà en cours pour mettre en œuvre 17 de ces recommandations, soit plus d'un tiers. Some of the most important recommendations require further analysis, planning, and consultation, and we will develop plans to address these remaining recommendations as quickly as possible, and we will report to Parliament on our progress. I will now discuss the recommendations that will address immediately, either through new efforts or by strengthening programs already underway. Let me address some of the key areas. First, Madame Arbour recommends a number of reforms to the Sexual Misconduct Response Center, an important resource for our employees and members who have experienced sexual misconduct. Madame Arbour's 12th and 13th recommendations are that we rename the SMRC to the Sexual Misconduct Resource Center, and that the SMRC's role should evolve to primarily provide resources for complainants, victims, and survivors of sexual misconduct. I accept these recommendations. Madame Arbour's 14th recommendations is that the SMRC facilitate immediate access to legal assistance to victims of sexual misconduct across the country. And I also accept this recommendation. We will make legal assistance available to victims across Canada on the full range of issues related to sexual misconduct in the Canadian Forces. J'accepte également et je vais mettre en œuvre les recommandations 15, 17 et 18 qui reflètent les améliorations au rôle et à la structure du Centre d'intervention sur l'inconduite sexuelle. Je vais maintenant aborder les changements recommandés au processus de recrutement et de formation des Forces armées canadiennes, plus précisément les recommandations 20 et 22. J'accepte toutes ces recommandations. Nous allons créer des périodes probatoires pour mieux évaluer les recrues. Nous allons externaliser certaines fonctions de recrutement et augmenter la compétence professionnelle des recruteurs et nous allons veiller à ce que les attitudes problématiques sur la culture et sur les enjeux liés au genre soient abordés. Next, let me discuss recommendations relating to promotions, selection, succession planning, and career management. I want to say, first off, that since my appointment, I have chosen to add external evaluation to the promotion process for senior leaders. And this process will serve as a foundation to further reforms in promotion and selection. Madame Arbour's important 30-second recommendation states that, in fulfilling my responsibility in improving the promotions of general and flag officers, I should be assisted by a senior civilian advisor not currently a member of the defense team, and work to ensure that general and flag officers reflect the demographic composition of our country. I accept this recommendation. J'accepte également les recommandations 33 et 35 de Mme Arbour qui visent à améliorer les processus d'évaluation et de certification des officiers généraux ainsi que des autres officiers et sous-officiers. Et enfin, permettez-moi d'aborder les recommandations de Mme Arbour concernant le renforcement le contrôle interne et externe. Madame Arbour's recommendation 41 and 42 state that the Assistant Deputy Minister of Review Services should brief me directly on all investigations related to sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, and leadership culture in the defense team, and on statistics and activities related to other particular types of investigations. I accept these recommendations. Madame Arbour's 45th recommendation is that the Chief Professional Conduct and Culture post a public online database of research and policies relating to sexual harassment and misconduct, gender, sexual orientation, race, diversity and inclusion, and culture change. I accept this recommendation and we will work towards implementing it. Et comme je l'ai déjà mentionné, j'accepte les recommandations 47 et 48. Je vais informer le Parlement de toute recommandation que nous choisissons de ne pas mettre en œuvre et je vais nommer un moniteur externe pour assurer la mise en œuvre qui me rendra compte. In addition to the recommendations that we are acting on immediately, I will now address 3 other sections of Madame Arbour's report. These 3 sections contemplate systemic change, and in the coming months we will study, analyze, and develop plans to respond to them. Madame Arbour's 5th recommendation is that the criminal code sexual offenses should be entirely removed from the jurisdiction of the military justice system as she has outlined today, and that they should be prosecuted in civilian criminal courts. This is a system-changing recommendation, and we will examine it in earnest, all while Madame Arbour's interim recommendation remains in effect. La recommandation 29 souligne la nécessité de régler les problèmes de culture qui existent depuis longtemps sur les campus du Collège militaire royal de Kingston et de Saint-Jean. Aucune de nos élèves officiers ne devrait faire l'objet de harcèlement ou de discrimination pendant son séjour à un collège militaire royal. Les Canadiens peuvent être assurés qu'au cours des prochains mois, nous allons travailler pour créer un milieu d'apprentissage plus sûr et plus inclusif pour nos élèves officiers, notamment en adoptant la recommandation de Mme Arbour d'élargir la portée de l'entrevue de départ pour y inclure les expériences des élèves officiers en matière d'inconduite sexuelle ou de discrimination. Finally, recommendations 36 through 40 address the clear need to improve the diversity of senior leaders in the organization, a goal that is near and dear to my heart. I absolutely agree that we must take steps to set and meet clear goals for diversity in our military to ensure that this crucial institution represents the demographic composition of our great country. Now let me discuss the path forward following today's release of this important report. I have been in touch with Madame Arbour regularly since my appointment. I can confirm that we are aligned in terms of our views of this problem and how we should address it. While I have listed 17 of Madame Arbour's recommendations that are in progress or which will be acted on immediately, this is just the beginning of our response. We will act quickly to analyze, review, and plan our responses to each and every one of Madame Arbour's recommendations. I will personally be evaluating whether and when we can implement these recommendations efficiently and effectively. Il ne fait aucun doute que nous allons travailler avec les groupes de survivantes et de victimes, et ce, tout au long de notre parcours, je vais rencontrer ces parties prenantes dans les semaines à venir pour comprendre et entendre leur point de vue sur les recommandations de ce rapport. And to further ensure that our institution acts on the recommendations from Madame Arbour and other external reviewers, we did create the External Comprehensive Reviews Implementation Committee, or ECRIC, this year. ECRIC will coordinate and oversee our action plan based on these reports and ensure that nothing falls through the cracks. Further, we will keep Canadians informed about this important work through quarterly briefings and the Pathways to Progress online tracker. This tracker is publicly available. It provides an overview of each of our lines of effort around culture and conduct and the change related to each. Now let me conclude. Last December, General Eyre and former Deputy Minister Jody Thomas and I offered a sincere and heartfelt apology to those who have suffered from sexual misconduct and harassment in the service of our country. I believed then, and I believe now, that apologies are most meaningful when they are coupled with action. Je vais continuer à travailler fort à chaque jour avec le général Eyre et le sous-ministre Matthews pour livrer des résultats. Je remercie Madame Arbour pour son rapport complet et détaillé qui va être une pierre angulaire de nos efforts du changement de culture à l'avenir. Et je remercie tous les membres des Forces armées et du ministère de la Défense nationale qui ont contribué aux efforts de Madame Arbour. The time for action is now, and together we will deliver reforms that stand the test of time to strengthen, grow, and improve this crucial institution. And if I could close with a quote from Madame Arbour herself, meaningful change will rest on the political will and determination of the civilians who oversee the Canadian Armed Forces. Still, it will not happen without the support of CAF leaders and ultimately the goodwill of all of its members who are, every day, entrusted with the duty to protect our country and who do so on our behalf. Thank you. Miigwech, merci.
Merci beaucoup. On a un peu plus d'une trentaine de minutes de prévues pour les questions. We have a little bit more than 30 minutes for questions. We will prioritize questions in the room first. If we have time, we will go to the phone. On va donner la priorité aux questions dans la salle et ensuite, si on a le temps, on va aller au téléphone. Je commence. We'll start with Mercedes Simonson from Global.
Thank you. Minister Anand, in the report, it talks about the importance of political will, and you yourself just referred to this as well. The Prime Minister is not here today, but he is going to a press conference later this afternoon. What message do you think this sends to the survivors of military sexual misconduct about the level of commitment that your government has at a political level to making real and long-term change?
Hi, Mercedes. Thank you for your question. I spoke with the Prime Minister this morning, and we had a conversation that lasted approximately 45 minutes. We discussed this report in detail, and we both agree and support all of the recommendations in this report. And we take extremely seriously the suffering of victims and survivors in the past and are committed as a government to moving forward with these recommendations today.
Thank you. General Eyre, the recommendations about Saint-Jean and RMC are what would be a potentially tectonic shift for the military. What is your response to the recommendation and the serious concerns about the culture issues that RMC and Saint-Jean are creating in the Canadian Armed Forces?
Well, Mercedes, thank you for that question. We absolutely have to embrace that recommendation to take a look. Do we have the model right for Kingston and for Saint-Jean, or is there another model that would better serve us? And so the intent is absolutely aligned with what the minister said. We are going to study the recommendation.
Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada.
Oui, bonjour. La première question est pour la ministre Anand sur la recommandation centrale, en fait, dans le rapport que les plaintes pour agression sexuelle soient traitées par une cour, non pas par une cour martiale, mais par une cour civile de façon permanente. Je comprends que vous dites qu'il faut qu'il y ait un examen qui soit fait, mais j'aimerais savoir, est-ce que vous pensez que c'est une bonne idée? Est-ce que vous êtes d'accord avec le principe, Mme Anand? Et du même coup, j'aimerais vous demander aussi, Mme Arbour, qu'est-ce qui vous a le plus choqué ou surpris dans votre examen?
Merci beaucoup pour la question. Je voudrais dire que j'appuie les recommandations dans le rapport et aussi pense que c'est très important d'examiner le système de justice militaire. Je vais écrire à nos partenaires provinciaux et territoriaux en matière de justice dans les prochains jours et je vais consulter les survivants et les groupes de victimes pour déterminer la voie à suivre pour faciliter le processus de transfert des cas. Nos fonctionnaires vont collaborer encore plus étroitement avec les autorités provinciales et territoriales. Nous devons établir et nous allons établir une table intergouvernementale officielle afin d'élaborer des processus de transfert durables qui serviront bien les membres des forces armées canadiennes à long terme. Mais à votre question, oui, j'appuie les recommandations et toutes les recommandations. C'est une question de mettre en œuvre la recommandation. Peut-être le sous-ministre, je ne sais pas si vous allez répondre avec quelque chose aussi.
Juste pour renforcer les mots que Mme la ministre vient de dire, on doit consulter avec nos partenaires dans la province et les territoires pour s'assurer que le processus est bien développé et le travail là va commencer tout de suite.
Merci. Alors, vous voulez que je réponde à votre question sur qu'est-ce qui m'a le plus surpris? Oui, choqué, surpris. Je pense que de façon générale, ce qui m'a le plus surpris, c'est l'intensité de l'environnement hermétique dans lequel cette organisation fonctionne. Et vous savez, moi, je viens d'une organisation qui, historiquement, était aussi très hermétique, c'est-à-dire le monde judiciaire, le monde de la magistrature. Mais si je compare un peu à quel point le monde judiciaire, c'est quand même essayer de se mettre au pas, surtout après la Charte canadienne des droits et libertés, mettre au pas de la société civile. C'était très frappant pour moi à quel point il y a eu une espèce d'autarcie au niveau des forces armées. Puis je pense que ça inspire toutes mes recommandations. L'importance d'amener un peu d'oxygène de l'extérieur dans une organisation qui ne pourra pas évaluer en vase clos.
Ma question de suivi pour la ministre Anand. Bon, le rapport est vraiment sans appel. Là, on dit que les efforts depuis le rapport des champs ont échoué. Votre gouvernement est au pouvoir quand même depuis 6 ans. Est-ce que vous prenez une partie du blâme?
Merci aussi pour cette question. Aujourd'hui, j'ai annoncé que nous commençons immédiatement à travailler ou à poursuivre le travail déjà en cours. Pour mettre en œuvre 17 de ces recommandations, soit plus d'un tiers. Et aussi, nous allons également élaborer des plans pour répondre aux autres recommandations. Ça, c'est important. Maintenant, c'est le temps pour mettre en œuvre notre plan et le rapport de Mme Arbour, c'est très important parce que c'est une roadmap pour faire ça. Et je suis très heureuse d'avoir cette roadmap. Nous attendons pour le roadmap et donc nous commençons immédiatement de travailler fort avec ces recommandations.
Ashley Burke, CBC News.
Hi, Madame Arbour. Can you sum up for us why you think it's important for civilians to be handling all sexual offenses and sexual harassment cases moving forward, and why you recommend that the military scrap the way it's been doing things, its long-established systems?
Well, as I think, expose in great details in the report, the jurisdiction, the military jurisdiction over criminal sexual offenses came in 1998. It's been virtually impossible to find any rationale behind that expansion of military jurisdiction. Prior to 98, this was fully within the ambit of civilian courts. And the only rationale is the fundamental rationale for military justice at large, which is the necessity to improve discipline, efficiency, and morale. And 20 years later, I think if you compare in details the progress of military justice in sexual-related offenses and in the civilian system, it's pretty clear that there's been very little improvement of efficiency, discipline and morale through that. I'll just give you an example. The minister just referred to the Declaration of Victims' Rights. That came into force in the criminal civilian system in 2015. It's going to come into force in the military justice system this June. It took 7 years for military justice to step up to the improvement in the civilian system. And I want to be very clear. I'm not suggesting that the prosecution of sexual offenses throughout Canada in the civilian system is perfect. But I think the disconnect between that and what's happening in the military system is not sustainable. I think and when I say in my report, the CAF has to open up to outside partners, civilian, the CAF should let others do what they can do better and more efficiently and concentrate on its operations. And in my view, it's true in justice, it's true in education. I didn't look at health because this was not within my mandate, but I think in the context of justice, imperfect as our civilian courts are, the capacity, the momentum for progress, and the example of the Declaration of Victims' Rights, I think is one of many examples that could be given. I think it will be better handled. It will have greater impact, more equity for victims if all this is done in the civilian system. And I should add, in my interim report, I recommended, presently there's concurrent jurisdiction, right? Both systems can do it. I recommended that in the interim, it should go to the civilian system. Here, I'm recommending that the jurisdiction of civilian court should be exclusive, that it should be completely taken away from the military system. And the reason for that is I believe that if a concurrent system is maintained, the competition between the two will not land the issue where I think it belongs. The military system will be keen to maintain it, and the civilians have already, surprisingly, in my view, expressed in some cases some reluctance to exercise a jurisdiction that they currently have, right? So I'm very concerned about the maintenance of concurrent jurisdiction. The minister has referred to the setting up of an intergovernmental body to manage that. We're talking 30 cases a year across the country. Seriously? And you have it in my report. Currently, there's also concurrent jurisdiction between the military system and civilian courts for driving offenses, driving under the influence, impaired driving. The military defers to the civilian system on that, and there's no intergovernmental bodies or a memorandum of understanding of protocols, or it's just they're happy to let the civilian system handle these cases. So if the provinces and territories are worried about an increase of volume of, 30 cases a year, maybe they should just tell the military to take back impaired driving cases.
Minister Anand or General Eyre, we've been asking for months to find out the number of cases that the forces have transferred over to the civilian system. Can you provide us an update today on those numbers? And as well, how many cases have been closed since your announcement was made in November 2021 that ongoing cases would be transferred over?
I have outlined in my remarks the process that we have been undertaking to transfer the cases from one system to the other since I accepted the interim recommendation of Madame Arbour. The alleged sexual offenses that are still in the court-martial system all flow from the charges that were laid before Madame Arbour's recommendation was received. And that is on the direction of the Director of Military Prosecutions, which stated that prosecutors should transfer these cases and consider the views of a complainant in doing so. In terms of investigations, as I mentioned, we have been working closely with our federal, provincial, and territorial partners to refer all investigations of alleged sexual assaults and sexual criminal offenses to civilian authorities. We have had the RCMP accepting transfers of new files from the forces since January. We have Quebec's Ministry of Public Safety advising their police force to accept new files since February, and the transfer of cases, generally speaking, is going well. I don't have the numbers with me at the current time.
Ryan Timothy, National Post.
Yeah, Mr. When this process was announced, when Justice Arbour's appointment was announced, your predecessor suggested that this wouldn't be another report that sat on a shelf, that you would be taking the recommendations and acting on them. Of course, we've got a lot of reports that have sat on a shelf after being, today you're only committing to implementing a third of the Justice's recommendations and to take the rest of the year to decide whether the others will come forward. I guess, how do you expect people to have confidence in this process?
First of all, I want to clarify, in case it isn't clear, that I agree with all of Madame Arbour's recommendations. I welcome all of them. I spoke with the Prime Minister this morning, and he, as well, agrees with all of Madame Arbour's recommendations. The 17 recommendations that I discussed in my remarks are recommendations that we can move on expeditiously now, and that's exactly what we're going to do. With regards to the remainder of the recommendations, We will chart a path forward. Some of them, as I mentioned in my remarks, involve systemic change, such as Recommendation 29 relating to the educational institutions. And we need to develop the path forward. And in fact, that is with the Department of National Defence, that is with the Canadian Armed Forces to develop that path forward. And we will, of course, be in constant communication with the external monitor, whom I will appoint, to evaluate and to ensure that we are respecting the wishes and the words of this report. I'm not sure if General Eyre or Deputy Minister Matthews would like to add anything about the process on the remainder of the recommendations.
So I think the establishment of the ECRIC, the External Comprehensive Review Implementation Committee, is going to be important in this regards to implement not just the recommendations in this report, but all of the other ones we've had as well, to look at ones that have the similar theme, to be able to address those as intended, to ensure that we have that alignment. The external monitor that the minister has committed to is going to be important as well for holding our feet to the fire to ensure that those are implemented.
Follow up?
Yeah, just to follow up, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm understanding this correctly. Are you saying you were going to implement all of these recommendations and it's just a matter of how, up to and including closing the colleges? And then specifically on one of these recommendations on transferring sexual assault cases to the civilian system, Justice Arbour just put a fairly eloquent reason for doing that, but it sounds like you're not committed to doing that long term.
Thank you. I agree with all of the recommendations, and I expect DND and the Canadian Armed Forces to examine quickly how we can do this, and if not, why not? The wording of the recommendation relating to reporting to Parliament does suggest that there will be a process of analysis in terms of charting the path forward to implement recommendations. And that is the work that the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence will take on in earnest in terms of responding to this report. In other words, I agree with and support all of these recommendations, and I do expect our officials to examine quickly how we can do this, and if not, why not?
So we will try to keep the answers and the questions short, please. We're trying to fit as much people as we can. Mackenzie Gray, CTV News.
Minister and General Eyre, I'd like a response from both of you on this. And there's been many reports previously, and we've heard from victims of sexual assault and sexual abuse over the years, but not a lot's changed for them. So what would you tell them today about why this is going to be different than what's happened before, when we've got previous reports saying many similar things?
I'll start and then I'll hand it over to you. So I have responded to this question already, but I will add to my response. First of all, we continue to ask more and more of our Canadian Armed Forces in order for them to defend our country, in order for them to undertake domestic and international operations. Our troops have to be able to trust their own colleagues. During my visits to bases across this country, from Esquimalt to Edmonton, to Borden, to Wainwright, to Halifax, I have spoken with our members, and I have heard an enormous willingness to embrace change. This report from Madame Arbour is extensive, 48 recommendations, the roadmap forward. I agree wholeheartedly with the significant problems that she has identified and believe that this is our moment to create change and to establish meaningful reforms that stand the test of time. I'm a lawyer, and I have a specialty in the management and governance of large organizations. My top priority is to build an institution where everyone feels safe, respected, and protected. And in that vein, I see Madame Arbour and me very much as partners in this. She has provided a roadmap forward, and now I will oversee the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence in terms of their implementation of these recommendations. Chief.
No, thanks, Minister. I just want to take this opportunity on behalf of all the members of the Canadian Armed Forces to thank Madame Arbour for this report and thank all who contributed to it and shared their accounts and their insights. For one who has grown up in this institution, it can be a difficult read. And perhaps what has happened in the past is we've been too defensive when we've had an external set of eyes on us. But we got to take this report in the spirit in which it was intended, and that is to make us a better institution, to improve our institutions so that we can continue to deliver for Canadians. Our country is under increasing threat across all elements of national power in all domains. And we owe it to this country to be the best institution we can, because the country is going to be increasingly calling upon us. If we can't protect our people, if our people can't feel safe, if we can't attract and retain talent from all segments of Canadian society, we are going to fail Canada. That's why it's so important. That's why change has to happen. In her opening comments in the report, Madame Arbour talks about palpable change being in the air. I sense that as well. As I go around with the minister, as I have my own visits, as I talk to our own leaders at various levels, that desire for change is there. We owe it to our people to make the changes. We owe it to our people to have confidence in their leadership and their reporting systems. So change is absolutely necessary. We have to welcome an external view of our organization, because as we've made clear over the course of the last year, we don't have all the answers. We don't have it ourselves. We have to welcome an external view, because no one has a monopoly on all the solutions that are required for the complex human problems that we're facing.
Mr. Arbour, my follow-up question is for you. You know, we've had many reports on many different subjects by esteemed people like yourself who come through, and we hear from ministers and other people who say we're going to implement some of these things, but the minister's already saying she's not willing to commit right now to implementing all of the measures. Are you worried that in the end this might end up just being one of those reports that collects dust on the shelf and only some of the things get implemented?
Let me say at the outset that in my previous professional life, I spoke in court orders, not recommendations. So I have to adjust to an environment in which you could do all this work and come up with what, in my view, is the clear way forward, but I can't force it on anybody. I hope that the force of persuasion of the analysis that is contained in the report will actually carry. But I should also say maybe one of the most important recommendations I made in this report is for the minister to say publicly, within a short time frame before the end of the year, which ones they don't intend to move on. So the current problem is that you never get a clear answer on that. The CAF is currently sitting on hundreds of recommendations, some more or less internally generated, many from external reports, others from examining what allies have done on similar issues, literally hundreds of recommendations. Some are self-contradictory, some I think have passed their expiry date in terms of their relevance. It's still all out there being mapped and decked and color-coded. So I think the first clarity that we should expect is something is not going to happen. Let's just say it. That would already, I think, be an important, would bring a lot of clarity on what I would consider the 4 or 5 critical recommendations I make here. I think clarity of purpose and clarity of intent will come a long way. After that, I just hope that these recommendations don't end up a little box on the chart of the many that are still being studied. But that's why, again, the minister has committed to, as I recommended, by the end of the year, taking a firm position on these recommendations. She says today the intention of the government is to move forward on these. And if there's some where there's disagreement, they're the elected officials. They'll make the decision. But I think clarity is critical.
And if I could just follow up, Mackenzie, I think you mischaracterized what I'm saying. I'm not saying we're not moving ahead on the remainder of the recommendations. What I'm saying is we're moving expeditiously on the 17 recommendations that I spoke to in my remarks. And the remainder of the recommendations I agree with, and I'm needing my department and the Canadian Armed Forces to provide me with the path forward. They are more complex. Some of them involve systemic change, and therefore I need to see the roadmap forward.
Libertion, Canadian Press.
Yes, hi. Thanks for talking to us today. I wanted to follow up on that point. I mean, everyone's talked about the numerous reports, numerous recommendations we've had before, going back to Deschamps and even before that. You have accepted every recommendation in principle. So I don't understand the point of having this external monitor when, you know, at the end of the day, it seems like everything's been accepted anyways. Madame Arbour, a lot of people have said what's necessary is external oversight. Yeah, I know you've emphasized the importance of civilian oversight. We have either seen governments unwilling or unable for years, decades perhaps, to exercise that power. And they say, experts have repeatedly said, what's necessary is that external oversight, an inspector general, a stronger ombudsman's office, something like that. I'd like you to explain why you have any confidence that this government or any government is going to exercise that civilian oversight that you have talked about, but which they have repeatedly refused to do.
As I explained, I think in some details, first of all, I don't see the need for an inspector general type of office being created as an oversight on change with respect to sexual misconduct. This is not about procurement or excellence in operations, right? This is a very targeted issue. We've looked at what these functions are in other countries. In Australia, for instance, it's overwhelmingly to oversee the military justice system. Well, if my recommendations are implemented, and that's my premise, I don't see the need for an inspector general if everything else in this report is implemented. If this is implemented, sexual offenses will be in the civilian courts. All the serious sexual harassment cases will be before the Canadian Human Rights Commission. So there's a lot of oversight no longer necessary because the work is going to be done with incompetent external authorities. And I want to stress, I am very concerned about multiplicity of processes, all with the same power to make further recommendations. That's what essentially an inspector general would do. We have the auditor general who's looked at that issue on several occasions. There's an ombudsman. There's parliamentary and Senate committees that have been on this issue for a long time. The media has played a critical role. Academics, it's a small academic community, but they're on it. At some point, you have to ask yourself, you know, if you create too many of these so-called oversight bodies, you dilute the political responsibility of the people sitting here. That's where I think it has to be done. Now, why I say we need an external monitor to implement these recommendations, it's because I don't want these recommendations to go on the chart that ECRIC has produced of the hundreds of pre-existing ones. I say I want these to be prioritized because I really believe if this gets done, you'll see that structural change will support the cultural change that needs to happen. So an external monitor is a body, a person that will be focused on making sure that this doesn't just sit on a box, that will keep a timeline and so on. But an inspector general of sexual misconduct, what? Reporting to Parliament on sexual misconduct in the armed forces, a very confidential set of information, while there are many external bodies, as I said, like the courts or the Human Rights Commission, who can make a huge contribution at arm's length from the forces. To me, that's a better model.
And if I could just add, the external monitor is extremely important. As I said, it is a procedural guidepost for us. And I'm actually very grateful for this recommendation. If you look at governance systems in other areas of law and organizations, you will see in some of those the appointment and usefulness of an external monitor. It is a means by which the process and progress of implementation can be reported directly to me. Indeed, it is a continuation, if you will, of the work that Madame Arbour has done to bring us to this point with this report. So from a governance standpoint, the existence of an external monitor is very sound. It is novel, and it will be very useful. and I'm grateful for the recommendation.
Let me just, Minister, if I may just add, I make a reference in my report to the experience I've had with my interim recommendation. So last November, the minister accepted my recommendation that sexual offenses should go to the civilian courts, right? I also made a recommendation there that the progress on implementing this interim recommendation should be reported to me on a monthly basis. Well, that was, in a sense, a precursor to this model. I am persuaded that had I not had monthly contact with the prosecuting authorities and the investigating authorities, the CFNIS and the JAG, on a monthly basis, and with the minister, they'd still be drafting the letter to the provincial authorities about how to move forward. I'm absolutely persuaded of that. The pace, the speed, the need to answer to someone about, well, what's happening? The minister says she's moving forward on that. So to me, this was a kind of micro experiment on the necessity to have somebody from the outside in charge of keeping the pace of progress.
There we go. Sorry, and as a follow-up, Minister, understanding what you're saying about accepting the recommendations, hearing what Madame Arbour has said about political responsibility, and I don't want this question to seem flippant, but, you know, in the past, whenever we've had these scandals, it's often fallen to the military and the military leadership as being responsible. They're the ones who have been taken to task for this. If this report falls by the wayside, these recommendations go the way of so many others, are you and the Prime Minister prepared to take responsibility for the next scandal?
This report will not fall by the wayside, as you've heard from me this morning. We are moving forward expeditiously with the first 17 recommendations, and we will move forward with the remainder once I'm presented with a plan for their implementation. A further important point is the willingness of the Chief of Defense Staff, in whom I have faith, as well as my Deputy Minister, in whom I have faith, to work collaboratively to ensure the recommendations in this report are given their full due and responded to effectively and efficiently. That's what's different this time, the team. And Madame Arbour has enabled us to have the roadmap to move forward in a very deliberate and responsible way. If we do not take this moment for what it is and implement the recommendations that identify deep areas of need for change in the Canadian Armed Forces and the defense team broadly, we run the risk of not being a fully effective military domestically and internationally. And in this moment in time, when the world appears to be growing darker, we must grab the bull by the horns and make these changes now.
Madame la ministre, le temps est écoulé. Est-ce que vous permettez qu'on aille à une dernière question en français, juste pour une question d'équilibre au téléphone, sans suivi? Ça vous va? Alors, on va permettre à ma collègue Émilie Bergeron de la presse canadienne de poser une question.
Merci beaucoup. Ma question pour Madame la ministre. Madame Annan, vous avez dit parmi toutes les recommandations que vous acceptez que vous allez nommer une personne indépendante chargée de surveiller le progrès de chacune des recommandations. Dans le rapport, Madame Arbour demande à ce que cette personne soit mandatée immédiatement. Donc, à quel moment allez-vous nommer cette personne? À quel moment elle va commencer son mandat? Et aussi, vous avez parlé de rapports fréquent de cette personne. Donc, à quelle fréquence exactement? Est-ce que ça va être à chaque mois, par exemple? Pouvez-vous clarifier? Merci.
Aussitôt que possible. Ça, c'est la réponse. Nous devons le faire aussitôt que possible et nous allons le faire.
Merci à tous et à toutes.
Thank you very much, everyone.